Hello. So I've seen a lot of not just online sentiments, but everyday sentiments as well, even in terms of the weather, right? That it didn't really feel like Christmas in comparison to what? In comparison to previous Christmases, right? So Ireland is after changing massively, right? There's an influx of people that don't share the same sort of festivities and don't share the same calendrical celebrations that we do, right? They don't share the same holidays. They don't have the same worldview, right? Regardless of what that worldview is, they don't share it. Okay, so that has an effect on things. It's like having a house. You have big house, 5 bedrooms, whatever, but you 10 couples, 10 people living in the house, right? And 10 of them always celebrate House Day on this certain date, and it's a lovely thing. They all build little model homes, and they all give these model homes as presents to the other people and all that stuff, right? And they sing songs and they have dances and they perform little plays and stuff to honor House Day. But over time, some of these people move out, and then you get another 5 people that move in. So you have five original people and 5 new people, and the new people don't celebrate House Day, right? But the original 5 do. They want to do the same thing, have the same banners, same celebrations, the same decorations, same songs, same dances, same stories, same celebrations, same plays and stuff, same performances, right? Same present giving. But the other 5 don't play that game, right? They have no interest in House Day because they don't celebrate it. They have their own thing that they do, right? And so House Day comes, and now you have 5 people who celebrate House Day, and they go through the rigmarole, they go through the same process as usual, right? The same traditions. But the other 5 don't. They just go around the house as normal. There's a there's no sense of the sacred with them on this day because it's just another Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever it is to them, right? So you can see on that over time the traditions get diluted, right? And just kind of phased out. Just get minimized, they get brought down to basic things, right? It's not an overall sense of togetherness and celebration that people have anymore in the house because House Day has lost its sparkle because the people in the house don't celebrate House Day pound for pound the way they used to when there was 10 House Day celebrants in the house, right? And you can extrapolate that then up to Ireland, right? Regardless of what the religious connotations are of any celebration, if you bring in people that don't have the same traditions, the traditions get watered down. They get a little bit atomized to certain regions, right, geographically. So certain areas of Waterford, right, they're not Christmassy people anymore because they are different people, right? So Christmas, whatever the festivity is, it starts to get marginalized geographically just based on the demographics that are there, right? So I was thinking, what if this was our last Christmas? Just went out with a bit of a whimper, right? Nothing massive to it. Didn't really feel like Christmas. It feels like a spring morning. The sky is blue. The air is mild. There's cars on the road, right? And we just continue on. Is there any resuscitation or rejuvenation that can be pumped into something, right? And then that makes me think, okay, so we have where we are, which is, let's call a spade a spade. We are a population that is going through a slow suicide. We call it an assisted suicide, right? The parameters are there, closing in on people. Life is difficult. There's no real room or space or time for imagination or for any reflection on what it is to be a human being. What makes us human, right? Where did we come from? What's the story with being here? Is there any story to it? Or is it a case of ticking off the 72 years till you kick the bucket and you're gone, right? So what has led us up to this? Because we know from previous generations, and speaking with previous generations, that life wasn't as miserable, or life wasn't miserable in the way it's miserable today. Back then, there was misery for other reasons, right? Poverty and theocratic governance, right? And people can argue with that and argue the pros and cons all day long, whatever you want. But you can't deny the fact that Ireland was a theocratic nation, right? It was dominated by religion. Talk to any old person, right? Well, that's just an anecdote. Of course it is, but you start collecting a significant number of anecdotes and you get a general feeling of the way the world was, for certain populations at least, right? So my interest then is looking at what has come before us today, because everything that has come before has led to here. And people will make the argument that we used to be a more sacred nation, or we used to be a more religious nation, a nation bound to our faith. I don't want to be bound to anything, right? That is not a willing choice. That is not coming up and out of me as a natural growth, right? The rose does not wish to be a daffodil because it's not in it. The rose wants to be as rose as it can be, right? So I don't want to be... The rose doesn't want the tumbleweed to come and tell it how to be a rose, right? The rose is rose all day long, and it'll be a rose until it dies, and it'll die the death of a rose, okay? I want the same for myself. I want the same for other people. And people will blame the new liberal philosophy and how it's just after destroying civilization in Ireland and how it's after rotting the minds of people. And there's elements of that are, of course, true. But the argument then is that this new philosophy has come and supplanted and taken over and destroyed the previous philosophical outlook, which was the Catholic outlook. My rebuttal to that would be, if the Catholic outlook and worldview and our faith was so strong, it would have been able to take on this new thing that came along, and as Catholicism was the truth and Jesus was the way, it would have easily been able to dismantle and spurn away, get rid of it, cast the devils out of it, right? Away you go, over the cliff with the swine, that kind of thing, right? It would have been able to do that because it was a substantial and strong and resilient faith that people had. And it made people strong and resilient and adaptive. But I don't see it that way. I don't believe that that was the case, because the proof is in the pudding. If what we had for hundreds, if not, what would you call it even, at least 800 years, if not going back to when people say was Christianity's inception in Ireland, back to Paddy, right? 500, maybe 600 AD. 500 AD, so 1500 years, 1600 years. If that tradition that we've had for over a millennium, was so strong and it was the truth and the way, then how come it got derailed by such an illogical worldview that is totally anti-natural, anti-biological, anti-truth even, anti-logic, right? How could that overthrow something that was so foundational and fundamental to the Irish people? Unless, of course, that sustained devotion and being bound to the faith of Catholicism was not natural to Irish people. And there was a part in the Irish mind, the Irish spirit, the Irish psyche, that wished for something more organic and natural. It never really clung wholly to that faith. So it let it go at the first opportunity. Once the clutches were released a little bit, Vatican II, go read it up, the clutches was released, right? The mechanical arm that, it grabs the teddy bears. It's stronger on every 50 goes or whatever. And then other times it has the teddy, but at the first bit of resistance or weight is felt, it just lets it go, right? I see that. The Irish just let go of that faith at the first opportunity after fighting for it, right? Fighting for the identification with it. Fighting for an identity. And the only offer that was given to Irish people was this or that, right? We did not wish to identify with those who were tyrannical towards us. So we got confused and identified with something that presented itself to us with friendly speak, as Oisin says to Patrick, right? You of the friendly words, who try and shame me out of my former way of being, right? We fell for that and we identified with that. And it saved many lives. It cost many lives too. But it left the Irish with the ability to identify with something that was purely their own, okay, in the face of adversity. But then, late 20th century, mid to late 20th century, we let it go. We let it go. And I believe we let it go because it was not natural to us. In totality, at least, right? It was not. It may have been based on something that was more in line with our fundamental views, the Irish people historically, but not totally. It wasn't organic to us. The fact that it's Roman Catholicism shows that it's not organic to us. And people are struggling wickedly with that, right? We took on an ideology that was not ours. We might have made it more Irish, as we do. Irish people adopt, ingest, digest, and internalize things, right? We colour it with our own sense of spirit. But what happens when that spirit is gone and eroded and dying and pleading for suicide, right? Pleading for it, begging for assisted suicide, even in actuality these days, right? But metaphorically, we're seeking it. So what happens when that spirit goes? Is there anything in the preceding ideology that would account for that? I believe that there is, right? If you take the story of Jesus, and you can read this, myth is great because it allows you, it can be read on many different levels, depending on the perspective of the person that is reading it. They're going to read into it and take from it their own standing, their own psychological grounding, right? You project into it and you take back out of it the very nature of your own makeup, right? And there's many different ways of reading the Jesus myth, and I'll offer one. That Jesus, from his inception, from his birth, was a character that was guided by external things. He was guided by a destiny and a fate that was bestowed on him by something external to him, by a father, his father, a God, that was external to him. There's very little internal motivation in what Jesus does. He's following the story as it has been given to him to act out, right? He understands that. He knows he will be betrayed because it's part of his fate. He accepts that. He carries the cross because he knows that it's part of his fate. He accepts that. He gets up on the cross. He doesn't struggle against it, right? And there's something, if you're reading that in a man adopting the burden of responsibility of his own existence, there's a beauty in that. But when you start to amplify that out to a story that should be applied to massive amounts of a population, you're going to get a myriad of different interpretations of that. And you're going to get dysfunction, right? Because there's a dirtier way of reading the story myth. And I think it is a way of interpreting it that is far more consistent with what we're seeing in Ireland than the more sacred and the more elevated way of interpreting the Jesus story, an individual way of interpreting the Jesus story. And that is, Jesus accepted his fate that he would die young. He accepted his fate that there was nothing he could do about it, and there's nothing he should do about it. Resist not evil, right? Turn the other cheek. It's there written for you. So he's nailed to the cross, and at the very end he has doubt. My Lord, why have you forsaken me? He has doubt. But he understands that is his fate, to allow himself to die. Why? To absolve other people of their sins. What are we seeing in the world today, in Ireland, in the West? We're seeing a civilization, Western people. We're seeing whole races that are willingly committing and engaged in acts of suicide and assisted suicide. Why? Because we feel guilty. Is there a case to be made that we are, in fact, at the very, very end of this mythos? We are acting out the very story of Jesus, where we're carrying the white man's burden, the cross, right? We are going to get up on it. We will be nailed to it. We will be killed for it. We will lose our very existence. Why? To absolve ourselves of the sins of everyone, right? You can see this being played out. It's being acted upon and being used against Western man. Look at what she did in the past, therefore commit suicide. That's what we're seeing. That is a far more coherent interpretation of the story that I think can be applied to what we're seeing in the world now than any other interpretation of it. And again, as times change, the interpretations will match and differ, because again, we are projecting our own states onto these myths, and we will act them out accordingly, right? We will read into it what is inside of ourselves. So I think we need to get rid of it. But look, it seems to be a bit of a struggle, because people are thinking, if we get rid of that, then what? I will offer you one counter to that. The Chulainn story, who has been told relentlessly in his story that if you act this way, you will die. You will die young. He accepts this. He says, I don't care what the fates say about me. I will act according to my own desires and actions and my own strengths. And if that leads to my death, then so be it. But I've been acting naturally, according to me. Chulainn acted according to him, according to his own heart. He didn't go along with something because something external to him, a god, a deity, or a master, or whatever, said you need to do this. He went and he followed his own intention, his own heart, right? Understanding that, of course, it might lead to his death, but by acting according to his own principles and values, he understood that if his actions and deeds were great in this life, then he would reach his own heaven, the Irish version of heaven, life after death, which is your name being carried by your descendants, stories being spoken about you based on the actions you did in this life. And what did he do when he was dying? He appeared to crucify himself. Instead of passively going along to being crucified and having his life taken, he had no doubt of what he was doing. He did not say, my Lord, my God, why have you forsaken me? That didn't appear to him, didn't appeal to him, I would imagine. But it probably never crossed his mind, right? So what he did, he took off his belt, threw it around himself and around a rock, so that while wounded, he could continue fighting, standing, while he died. Is that not a more powerful story? Would that story not motivate us in a better direction, or move us in a better direction than the one we are heading towards, which is face first off the cliffs of Moher? Should we not turn around and face what is driving us towards the cliffs? Should we not take a more Chulainn stance instead of a passive Jesus stance?